You know that feeling when you start something, a new plan, a new goal, and for a few days you're on fire, and then it just disappears. The energy, the excitement, gone, like it was never really there.
Yeah, and then you wonder, was I ever actually motivated or was it just a feeling?
Exactly. Today, we're going to talk about that, for real.
Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Real English. I'm Eric.
And I'm Lara, and this is the podcast where we talk about, well, real things in real English. You know, the kind of English you actually hear people use, not just in textbooks.
Exactly. And today we have a topic that I think everybody can relate to. Motivation. How do you stay motivated? Because it's not easy, right?
It's really not. And I think a lot of people, learners, professionals, students, whoever you are, you've probably been in that situation where you start something with a lot of energy and then it just kind of fades.
Right. So today we're going to talk about that. Why we lose motivation, what actually helps, and some real honest strategies. Not the kind of stuff that sounds great in theory but doesn't actually work.
Yeah, none of that just wake up at 5 in the morning and run 10 kilometers stuff.
Please no. Okay, so let's get into it.
So, first, I think it's worth asking what even is motivation? Because people use that word all the time, but what does it actually mean to you, Eric?
That's a good question. I think for me, motivation is basically the reason why you do something, like the thing that pushes you to act? It can be something external, like someone tells you, great job, and that makes you want to keep going, or it can be something internal, like you just genuinely care about what you're doing.
Right, and there are actually two terms for that: extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So, extrinsic, that means external. It comes from outside, a reward, money, grades, approval from other people. And intrinsic, that means internal. It comes from inside you. Like you do something because it feels meaningful or because you enjoy the process itself.
And researchers say that intrinsic motivation is generally stronger, like more lasting. Because if you're only doing something for external rewards, the moment that reward disappears, your motivation disappears too.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, if I'm only studying English because my boss told me to, and then I change jobs, suddenly I have no reason to continue.
Exactly. But if you're doing it because you actually love the language, or you want to connect with people, or it's just something that matters to you personally, that's a lot harder to lose.
So the first question to ask yourself is, why am I doing this? Like, really, what's the reason underneath the reason?
Okay, so we've talked about what motivation is, but let's be honest, even when we have a strong reason, we still lose motivation sometimes. And I think it's important to understand why that happens, because otherwise you just feel bad about yourself. Like, what's wrong with me?
And nothing is wrong with you, by the way. That's the first thing to say.
Yeah, exactly. Losing motivation it's normal. It's human. I think one of the biggest reasons is that we set goals that are too big or too vague. Like, I want to get fit. Okay, but what does that mean? By when? How?
It's too abstract. There's no clear step to take today, and when you don't know what to do next, you just freeze, or you scroll your phone for 2 hours.
Guilty. Another reason is, I think, we expect progress to be linear. Like, we think, okay, every day I'm going to get a little better. And the reality is more like some days you go forward, some days you go backwards, some days nothing seems to happen at all.
And that's really discouraging because you feel like all that effort for what? Nothing is changing.
Right. And then there's also the comparison trap. You look at other people, especially online, and they seem to be achieving everything so easily. And you're like, why am I struggling so much?
Which is, of course, not fair because you're only seeing their highlights, not their bad days, not the days they also wanted to quit.
Exactly. So a lot of motivation loss comes from these distorted expectations, either about the goal itself, or about the process, or about yourself compared to others.
And I'd add one more thing: burnout. Sometimes you lose motivation not because you're lazy, but because you're genuinely exhausted. You've been pushing too hard for too long, and your mind and body are just done.
That's such an important point. Rest is not the enemy of productivity. It's actually part of it.
Okay, so let's get practical. What actually helps? And Eric, I know you've tried a lot of different approaches over the years, so what works for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've tried a lot of things. Some of them were completely useless, some of them really helped. I think the biggest one for me is breaking things down. Like, instead of thinking about the big, scary goal, you just focus on the next small step.
The next small step idea is really powerful because it feels achievable, you know? Instead of, I'm going to write a whole book, it's, I'm going to write one paragraph today.
Right. And there's actually a concept called a minimum viable effort. The idea is, what's the smallest version of this task that you can actually do, even on a bad day, even when you have no energy? Because doing something small is always better than doing nothing.
I love that because I think a lot of people have this all or nothing mentality. Like, if I can't do the full workout, I'm not going to do anything. But even 10 minutes is better than zero.
Totally. And actually, and this is interesting, sometimes once you start with that small thing, you end up doing more because starting is the hardest part.
The beginning is always the hardest. Once you're moving, it's easier to keep moving.
Exactly. Another thing that really helps me is connecting with your why regularly. Like, not just at the beginning of a project, but throughout. Reminding yourself, okay, why did I start this? What am I actually trying to achieve? What will it feel like when I get there?
It's like keeping the vision alive because it's easy to get lost in the day-to-day and forget why any of it matters.
Right. And one practical way to do that is writing it down. Actually writing your reasons. Because when it's in your head, it's abstract. When it's on paper, it feels more real.
I actually do this. I have a little notebook where I wrote down why I started learning my third language. And on the days when I really don't want to study, I read it. And it helps. Not always, but often.
That's a great habit. And speaking of habits, I think habits are honestly the most underrated motivation strategy. Because if you have to use willpower every single day to do something, you're going to run out of willpower eventually. But if something becomes a habit, you just do it, almost automatically.
So the goal is to make the behavior automatic, not to rely on motivation every time.
Exactly. And that takes time. But once it clicks, it's like you don't even have to think about it.
Right. And actually, there's something called habit stacking, where you attach a new habit to something you already do. Like every morning after I drink my coffee, I do 10 minutes of reading. The coffee is already automatic, so the reading kind of gets pulled along with it.
Oh, I love that. It's like borrowing motivation from something you already do consistently.
Okay, but let's talk about setbacks. Because even with all these strategies, there will be days when things don't go to plan. You miss a day, you fail at something, you feel like you've gone backwards. What do you do then?
I think the most important thing is not to catastrophize. You know that word, catastrophize? It means to make something seem worse than it is. Like you miss one day of practice and suddenly you're like, I'll never achieve anything. I'm a failure. It's over.
I've definitely done that.
We've all done it. But the truth is, one missed day doesn't ruin anything. It's a pattern that matters, not a single day. And actually, and this is something I read somewhere, researchers who study habits say that the important thing is not to miss twice in a row. One missed day is an accident. Two missed days is the beginning of a new habit, the wrong one.
Oh, I like that. Never miss twice. That's actually really practical advice.
Right. And I also think it helps to practice self compassion, which is basically treating yourself the same way you treat a good friend. Like, if your friend failed at something, you wouldn't say, you're useless and you'll never succeed. You'd say, okay, that was hard. What can you learn from it? What's the next step?
Exactly. We're often so much kinder to other people than to ourselves.
So much kinder. And self-compassion isn't about making excuses. It's about being realistic and supportive so you can actually get back up and try again.
One more thing I want to talk about before we wrap up: accountability. Because I think for a lot of people, having someone else know about your goal makes a huge difference.
Oh, absolutely. Because when it's just you and your goal, it's very easy to negotiate with yourself. Like, I'll do it tomorrow. But if someone else is watching or expecting something from you, it's much harder to back out.
Right. And that doesn't have to mean a professional coach or anything like that. It could be a friend, a study buddy, even just posting your progress somewhere, in a group, in a journal, anywhere.
The act of sharing creates a kind of commitment. You feel more responsible. And also, being part of a community of people working towards similar goals, that's incredibly motivating because you see other people making progress and it reminds you that it's possible. If they can do it, maybe I can too.
There's something really powerful about that, feeling like you're not alone in the struggle.
Totally. And I think that's especially true for language learning, actually. Like being part of a community of English learners, people who understand exactly what it feels like to struggle with grammar or pronunciation or just feeling embarrassed when you speak. That solidarity is really, really valuable.
Okay, before we go, let's quickly recap some of the vocabulary we used today, because that's kind of the whole point of this podcast, right? You're learning English, and you're hopefully picking up some useful words along the way.
Right. So the first one, motivation, the reason or drive behind what you do. And we talked about two types: intrinsic, which comes from inside, and extrinsic, which comes from outside.
Then we mentioned discouraging, which means something makes you feel like giving up. The opposite is encouraging. It gives you energy to continue.
We also use the word catastrophize. That means to imagine something as much worse than it actually is. And self compassion, being kind and understanding towards yourself, especially when things go wrong.
And finally, habit stacking, attaching a new behavior to something you already do automatically, a really useful strategy.
Great words to add to your vocabulary list. Write them down, try to use them, and you'll remember them much better.
Okay, so that's it for today's episode. I really enjoyed this conversation, actually. I feel like we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, I think so. And I hope it was useful, not just for your English, but also genuinely for your life. Because motivation is something everyone deals with, every single person.
Right. And the main takeaway, I think, is don't rely on motivation alone. Build habits. Be kind to yourself. Stay connected to your why, and don't miss twice.
I love that. Okay, so if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend who's also learning English. And if you have a question or a topic you'd like us to talk about, reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
We'll be back next week with another real conversation. Until then, keep talking, keep learning, and don't give up. You're doing better than you think.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.